that he's gotten into fashion lately? What is that rumor?
I think that's the memes, right? Online people just say that all the time in the chats. He might be into fashion, but it's clear that he's still into the chess, and we do have liftoff, so the game is underway.
Here we go. Game 2, you guys, between Alireza Firouzja and Arjun Erigaisi.
Well, he might be into fashion, but you guys should get into punditry. I mean, Kaya and Robert, 1d4 on the board. I love it.
Nailed it again. And it's a London system.
Oh, boo. Are we allowed to boo openings here in the studio?
Is that because it's a boring opening?
I just think that it creates a situation that is a slower build-up. It's not going to be a game. Maybe they'll show differently, but it's usually kind of a calmer start to these positions.
Yeah, I think we're only allowed to boo the London system, the French, and maybe the Berlin. Those three. Anything else is off limits. Those three, fair game. But yeah, it has made Firouzja pause for thought. I'm very surprised, I must confess, because Erigaisi has been dabbling in the London system quite a lot over the last year or so. He's also been playing the Jabava London many times. He used it against Magnus, for example, in the World Rapid Championship. So this surely shouldn't have come as a surprise if Firouzja was doing his preparation. But maybe he was just thinking, new match situation, I'm down a point, I want to play for a win. I can't just choose a solid option. I can't just play for a draw in this one. So Firouzja fianchettos his light squared bishop over there on the queen side. I was about to say, could we be going towards a Queen's Indian type of setup? But d6 there, pushing a pawn, just blocking the London bishop, the white dark squared bishop there. Very sensible. He's getting ready to bring more pieces out and just keeping Erigaisi guessing here. It's very much out of the realms of theory here. It's just about who understands the plans, the setups better in the ensuing middle game.
I also like how flexible both players have kept their structures. Black can also fianchetto the other bishop, I was just about to say, from the king side. G6 and the bishop lands on this long diagonal. White not committing the c-pawn. So here, Arjun is deciding whether he wants to put it to c3 or to c4 for a more aggressive approach in the center.
Mm-hmm. First, we might see Erigaisi just get his king to safety, get the white king castled. London system players, they follow a tried and tested method here, a system in the opening. They just want to put the white bishop out, maybe on e2, get the white king castled, drop the dark square bishop back, and then start playing chess, and then start playing the game. The London system, not everyone's favourite. Loads of memes out there for it, but hopefully this one will liven up at some point.
Yep. We are following the second game. Arjun Erigaisi is in the lead, and I've seen a bunch of your selfies popping up on the screen as well. We do love to see that, you guys joining in on the action. Share your selfie on Twitter using the hashtag ChessChamps, and every day during the Airthings Masters, we will pick a selfie winner of an Airthings device. It's actually signed by Magnus Carlsen himself. So enter the competition by sharing your selfie. We want to see where in the world you're watching the chess from, who you're watching it with. Is it late at night? Is it early in the morning for you? Wherever you are in the world, share your selfies.
So if I share a selfie of who I'm watching with, the three of you, do I automatically win?
You don't automatically win, but you automatically enter the competition.
We'll fix it so that you don't win, Rob.
We might also be able to hook you up with an Airthings device.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that more throughout the event, but air quality, we have found in past seasons, in past years, that it has had a direct effect on the players, the quality of their play. We've seen Magnus Carlsen play well when he's got great air quality. I know Anish Giri really lives, he kind of swears by the Airthings device, so hopefully whoever gets it in the end will use it to kind of benefit their chess.
I mean, so important for chess players with the online chess playing from their homes to have good air quality. If CO2 levels are super high, it's going to be hard to concentrate.
For sure, and something else that needs air is someone's position. And you see the last move that was played, the pawn push in the center gives some air to the black pieces. And it looks like Arjun, he decides to hop forward with his knight. He's keeping the tension. That's something very instructive in chess. You don't release the tension until the moment you feel is ready, because you don't just want to take a piece as it is simply offered. But this does give black the opportunity to push that central pawn forward and create an attack towards the white king. So it's going to be an interesting battle here. I think just the type of position that Alireza Firouzja could hope for out of a London system.
Yeah, and the debate is always, as Robert mentions, when to push this pawn forward or if to push this pawn forward, because, yes, you can gain some time. Actually, he doesn't go for this. He captures the pawn, but after the white knight steps back, the dark square bishop, the London bishop, actually gains in power, gains in influence along this diagonal long term. And unless you can actually go for this king and checkmate it, then often this is something that may backfire. Instead, Firouzja, slightly surprisingly to me, captures this pawn. This is something we don't often see in the London system too much. Now white, I'm assuming, will recapture this way, and there will be a semi-open c-file for the white rook later. Still the same issue of this dark square bishop having a watchful gaze over this diagonal. This does happen, and Firouzja says, OK, you've got a slightly more open position now. I'm going to lock down the queen side. I'm going to fix the pawn structure here. Black's pawns are going to stay in this formation for, I think, forever, if they can. And play will switch towards the central squares. Black is maybe going to plant a knight on this nice e4 square and start pushing some pawns towards the white king. From your London experience, London system experience, guys, what do you think? Is this, well, who's this going to favour, this pawn trade? I'm surprised, I must say.
I actually like what Alireza has done with this pawn trade, and I think it was encouraged by white's move, pushing that a pawn to a4. And this is the point that I was going to make, David, that the knight can jump to b4 as well, because white's pawn has all the way gone up to a4. You don't have to move a3 pushing that knight. So the b4 square is a super nice square for your knight to land on. So yes, you want to trade in the center, forcing white, well, not forcing, but white wants to pick that pawn up with the c pawn as he did. But in that bargain, you kind of give up control over this b4 square, and that's what Alireza is fighting for. So a nice idea there.
Okay, interesting stuff.
Although I might say that the pawn push that Alireza made of pushing the pawn to a5, I think that gave white some ground, because just like you're bringing the knight into b4, white can bring the knight via a3 up to b5. And the big problem for black is you can't touch either the c or the d pawns. If you push the c pawn, you lose the pawn on d6. If you push the d pawn eventually up to d5, if the knight moves out the way, then c7 will be a quick target. So I feel like that move a5 was one of those just small moves that has a big consequence.
Mm-hmm. Consequences for both sides, certainly. And let's go back to the players. I do expect them, because this is a more maneuvering type of battle, to spend quite a lot of time. I do notice, especially in the rapid format, players tend to invest their time when there's lots of different plans to choose from. When it comes to calculation, they're so quick. They make decisions very, very fast, and they're usually right. So here, where there's no right or wrong answer, where it's just a matter of taste, a matter of style, they do tend to tank for a while. So Erigaisi now down 3 minutes on the clock. This is kind of a reverse of the first game between these guys, when it was Firouzja and his clock handling that cost him. But wow, piece sacrifice. And Tanya, your first instinct was what? He's given up a bishop, his London bishop, for 2 pawns.
That is the bishop that you just love. This is the reason you play the London, and he gives it up. Well, the idea is clear. You're hitting that rook on e8. You're hitting that bishop on b7. And black has to answer the question, has to give back some material here. There's one interesting idea that does exist. Queen b8, defending that, saying that you take the bishop, you take the rook on e8, but I get 2 pieces in return. Mm-hmm. And it looks like it might be enough for black. I am shocked at this decision, David.
Yeah, and if we do a quick count now, we do see that white has parted with a bishop and knight. That's worth 6 points. Black, however, has parted with a rook and 2 pawns, worth 7. So kind of if we do a bit of maths, white should be ahead. But top chess players, they often prefer the pieces rather than the rook and pawns. Here, white's rooks, one of them is OK on the open c-file, the other one fast asleep at home. White's pawns can't really advance, and often it actually helps having more pieces here, black having the knight and bishop, because if you do whip up an attack later on, 2 pieces will be better than 1. And Robert, what do you think of this committal decision by white?
Well, big choice from Arjun Erigaisi, and I'm used to trusting him. He's such a strong player that he would not make the sacrifice. He hadn't looked at a similar type of sacrifice in the past. But what we're saying certainly holds true, that the 2 minor pieces can team up on a square or on a piece, and rook is only 1 piece. It's going to be difficult to defend. So for now, I like white's position. I think everything is nice and neat. But I could see a future where black just improves piece by piece, and then white will not be able to deal with it, because there are no more targets in black's position. What are you going to go after? Everything is safe and sound, so I do feel like as this game continues, it's decide who has the better plan that is going to have the advantage.
Yeah, so this one, despite the evaluation bar being roughly in the middle, it could go either way later on. And yeah, I kind of love and hate that decision by Erigaisi. I hate it because I would never be brave enough to play something like this myself, because it's so imbalanced, it's so complex. But I also love it from a fan's point of view, because this one is going to be anything but a draw. This one, it could go either way, especially if, as we predict, is very likely at this point, black's pieces do start to improve, do start to mobilize. And white's rook, if it can't use the open c-file, it will feel like a bit of a silly piece. So, yeah, all to play for in this one.
All to play for, and black needs to watch out because white has got a devious threat right now because white wants to push off that knight on d5 with the move like e4. Notice how the queen on e8 cannot pick up that pawn on e4 because the knight on d7 is hanging, and then you'll be forced to move that knight, and white's rook can jump to c7, which is why Alireza takes the decision to move the rook to the center of the board, defending the d7 knight, so that if you do go e4, now the black queen is free to capture the pawn.
Yeah, it's free to capture the pawn, and importantly, the knight is defended. So, yeah, hidden threat there. I actually missed that one, Tanya. But, of course, these top players, they do spot those ideas, and nice defensive move there from Firouzja. If we're talking about white improving pieces, maybe you can finally utilize this rook, try to start motoring your pawns up the board. You have to use your pawns. Remember, you do have 2 more of them if you're white here than black does, but it's not going to be easy. For example, if you do move the rook to support a pawn push, black can clamp down on that one, maybe push the f-pawn to control that square, maybe occupy that square with the queen, a bunch of options. And yeah, it's hard, as we mentioned, to get this rook into its dream post on c7 for now, because it's protected by a knight. But watch out for Erigaisi trying to tactically enable that maneuver a bit later on.
So we are expecting this now to be an interesting battle. I was going to ask right before Erigaisi made those huge decisions if we should switch games, because I could see on the bars in the other games that maybe Magnus Carlsen is struggling against Alexei Sorana. If you've seen that game, Robert,
he is. I was looking at the game at the corner of my eye, and for Magnus Carlsen, he won with the white piece in game 1 very convincingly. Here in game 2, it looks like Sorana. If you didn't show the audience who had what color, you might think that Magnus Carlsen had the white pieces, because it's just a clear advantage for Alexei. He is playing very well in the second game.
All right, and Hikaru Nakamura, though, the bar all the way it's over to his side. Against Gukesh, he won the first game, Hikaru Nakamura. And you guys, shout out if we have to switch games, but it does sound like there will be a lot of action in this one.
It feels like for now this is the place to be, but we will keep you guys updated. I should also mention with Sorana, in the play-ins, he went 7 for 7 with white.
Wow.
And in the World Blitz, he beat Nakamura and Carlsen with white. So those are the games he's banking on, he's relying on. He needs to win those ones. With black, as we saw in game 1 of the day, he does struggle a bit. He didn't score so well, and his black repertoire maybe not as bulletproof as he is with the white pieces. And Carlsen just wants to survive that one, but it's going to be an uphill task. Sorana doing very well.
And Sorana is known to be a beast with the white pieces. His preparation, the way he plays once he gets the initiative, so it's definitely going to be a tough one for Magnus. And looking at what we have in front of us, I think it's going to be a tough one for Alireza as well. I love the idea that you mentioned earlier, David, of bringing the rook into the center of the board with rook e1, and it's been played. The idea is simple. You really want to land that c-rook on c7. You want to hit that bishop, the pinned knight on d7. e4 is a massive threat on the board, and if black does bring the queen all the way forward to the central square, stopping that, white can make a retreating move with the knight, hit that queen on e4 and force it back and get that central pawn moving. This can be big pressure for black.
Yeah, if these 2 pawns land on e4 and d4, they control all the squares. They neutralize the vision of those black minor pieces. They really take away some squares. The knights aren't necessarily on great circuits right now. Okay, you can plant a knight on a nice outpost, but suddenly, boom, the rook lands on the 7th rank, and disaster for black, potentially. Yeah, suddenly big questions to answer for Firouzja.
I think a big question is why he made his previous move. The position is one that is very complicated, so we don't want to be overly critical, but h6, just kind of a casual pawn push in a position that's getting very messy, allowed white the time to bring the rook to e1 and push this pawn up in the center, kicking away black's minor pieces. So I think that h6 was just a little bit too slow in the position. He probably should have moved his queen up out of the pin, and that way his knights could be a bit more free. So I just think that last move from Firouzja is one he'll regret.
Yeah. You can't play slow moves. You don't have that luxury in these types of positions. And maybe that's just a bit of rust from Firouzja. It feels like he's not quite at his best yet in terms of kind of the energetic play that we're used to seeing from him. But will he find a justification for that strange pawn push? This is the current position after white moves the rook to e1, and big threat on the board. He needs to solve it. He needs to find an antidote. And, OK, 9 minutes for Firouzja, 8 minutes for Erigaisi. This one's still in the balance for now. But black the one under pressure.
We do have some questions coming in on Twitter with some viewers using the hashtag #ChessChamps. There is a question for you, actually, now, Tanya. And I bet this is from a fan in India wondering what chances you give Arjun of winning the whole thing.
Well, as commentators, we're supposed to be not biased, but I'm going to admit that I was super happy to see 2 Indians make it to this first division of the first ever double elimination bracket that we've got. We had 6 spots up for qualification, and Gukesh and Arjun both made it to the top.
Amazing.
And in a great way in the playoffs. I think Arjun, he's had such a meteoric rise. He was around 2,500, and then over a period of a year, he gained about 100 points. Went on to play in the Champions Chess Tour in a brilliant way at the Tata Steel Chess India Rapid and Blitz. Who would have thought that he would have won the championship? He won the Rapid, lost in the playoff in the Blitz, finished second. So I think he's definitely someone to watch out for. Now, when you've got players like Hikaru and Magnus and Wesley playing, it's not going to be easy. But in my heart, I am rooting for Arjun and Gukesh. There, I said it.
You're very allowed to. Very allowed to, Tanya. Definitely.
Well, Tanya, you must be happy to see the last move on the board because the evaluation bars reacted in Arjun's favour.
Wow.
We need to figure out why now, which is less clear maybe, but it's looking good for white.
David, I understand the move rook c8. We've been screaming about this idea of e4 and getting that rook to c7. So Alireza tries to challenge that open rook on the c file. But the one thing that stands out is now the knight on d7 is just super tender. If you're able to build up an attack on that, that would be bad news.
Yeah, this would be terrible news if we can put pressure on this d7 knight. It looks difficult at the moment. I'm wondering whether you can, for example, trade off one set of rooks. Actually, I was told that, especially in these imbalances, rooks versus minor pieces, you want to have one of everything. It's like ice cream flavors. Once your opponent doesn't have any rooks anymore, here, black doesn't have any rooks, suddenly you become very tender on certain squares, and especially if the white rook gets into the game. And now I'm wondering, do you push the pawn up? Maybe you switch the bishop back onto this diagonal. Maybe this would be a nasty threat for black to deal with. Actually, now I look at it, this looks devastating. And, OK, he doesn't go for this Erigaisi. I was going to say, now the knight can be defended, yes. For example, you can back it up with another knight, but finally overpower the knight in the centre. Once it moves, white breaks through on the diagonal. You win at the third pawn, sorry. And this looks crushing almost. And Robert, instead he's gone for something else. He's missed this opportunity and played e4. Is this equally strong?
I think it's a case of mutual oversight. We've had so much focus on the C file and the pin on the knight on D7 that looking at the F7 square being tender was kind of out of their mind. So I get why both players missed it. There's just so much else going on, but a missed opportunity there for Arjun. His position still looks very good. If you can push your pawns in the center, you have 2 extra pawns. You want to make use of them. You're limiting the scope of your enemy's pieces, but the more your pawns move up the board, one of those bishops might end up thriving. So it's a double-edged position, and I think Alireza, now he all of a sudden, with a knight in enemy camp, he can be feeling a little bit better, even if he objectively is worse here.
Yep, he's struggling, but he does have this one very active piece, and yeah, you want to kick it out, you want to get rid of it as soon as possible. Thus, Erigaisi comes over, swings his queen, and drives the knight back. He is pushing this piece back. If it has to retreat, momentum white yet again. So still looking good for Erigaisi. Maybe not as good as it could have been. He could have won another pawn to add to his collection, but still very strong. And Firouzja is having to contort himself, play some odd-looking moves, now pushing a pawn to g5. That's very weakening, very loose, that type of move. It needed to happen, though. It needed to be done. And he's clinging on to active squares for his pieces. There is a bit of a difference building up on the clock. Erigaisi certainly spending a lot longer in this game than he did on the previous attacking masterpiece from game 1. But if he speeds up, he's still doing very well. Tanya, still cheering for him.
100%. Arjun realizes that he should be better in this position as long as he keeps those minor pieces that black has under control. The pawn structure in the center takes away so many key squares. That bishop on b5, pinning down that knight on d7. So he knows the position's good, but he can't slow down. He has to make sure that he keeps up the pressure. Now, black's last move, the pawn push to g5, it controls his own knight on f4, but does give up the f5 square. And I was thinking about this, that land something on h4. I was wondering if the knight can go on h4, but Arjun comes up with another idea, David, of trying to break that pawn chain. And I look at our eval bar. It doesn't love the move, but from a human perspective, I think it's very strong.
Yeah, certainly ask some really difficult questions of Firouzja right now. How do you defend that pawn that's just been attacked on g5? If that pawn ever gets dislodged, then the black knight falls. And it's difficult. Suddenly it does feel like you're being overwhelmed, kind of stretched your defenses. The black queen is tied down. She's looking in so many different directions. She needs to defend her knight, her rook, and she can't kind of swing to the defense of her king. I'm struggling to find moves here as black, I've got to say.
I think he's going to have to slide his queen one square over to the starting square, either after the rook trade or in the current position, and that way you defend this pawn on g5. Tactics may favor the side with more pieces on the board, and black has 2 minor pieces for a rook. So the queen may be overloaded, but if you start some trades, perhaps it's black's pieces that go into the position and start creating attacks, and the white king is the one that actually lacks shelter.
Yeah.
I want to point out one interesting tactic that exists in the position that the players need to watch out for. After h4, we are looking at this line with rook takes c1, the trade on c1. And David, you were pointing out that white picks it up with the rook, which is such a natural move. And black does have the opportunity, once you do that, to actually capture the pawn on e4. Because look at the geometry with that knight on f4 targeting the e2 square, where it can fork the king and the rook. You can allow the knight on d7 to be hanging because the bishop on b5 needs to defend the e2 square. And I think the tactics just seem to be working out. And look at this rook c1 on the board, and Arjun needs to be careful now.
Yeah, this could happen, this variation. You mentioned a knight check landing. It's 4-5 moves in the future, but the fact that Erigaisi has paused means it's on his radar.
This is not going to happen, David.
Yeah, I think you're right. But we needed to show that it's kind of a potential slip-up here for Erigaisi. If he takes with the rook, things will turn around in black's favour. As you mentioned there, Tanya, queen takes pawn would be extremely strong, picking off one of white's kind of prized possessions there in the centre. But the fact he has stopped means he's going to calculate and he's going to realise he has to take with the queen. And now you definitely don't want to take this pawn with the bishop because you walk into a pin on the e-file. And there we go. You predicted it. He does take with the queen. And still in the balance. But black's queen now getting active, at least creating some threats. Robert mentioned it a couple of moves ago. Potentially the white king could come under fire.
Oh, my goodness. This is one of those positions where the evaluation bar does not tell the story. We see objectively white is better with the best moves. Operative word being best. It's difficult to make great moves when that queen is sliding up to the g4 square, 2 squares in that diagonal towards the white king. And there's checkmating threats immediately. And if the only way to stop checkmate is by pushing that pawn in front of your king, you almost never want to push pawns in front of your king like that. It opens up diagonals, it creates weak squares, and black's forces are about to hop right in. This could be big trouble if Arjun Erigaisi does not show pinpoint accuracy.
Yeah, and it's going to be difficult to show that type of accuracy with only 3 minutes on the clock, minimal increment coming on per move. Okay, he takes a pawn, but this is really playing with fire, we've got to say. The black queen is poised. She's ready to jump in. I'm not sure whether she will immediately, but that threat will stay on the cards for the next few moves. There's all sorts of captures here. The black knight can even take a pawn on g2. You have to work out the consequences there. Worst comes to worst for Firouzja, you just take this pawn back, the white pawn on g5, and you say, OK, the tactics are still in the air. I'll make you think, I'll make you calculate a bit more. The fact the evaluation bar hasn't reacted means that maybe there's no knockout blow for black and maybe no tactics work right now. But that's what Firouzja is going to spend his remaining time on. He's going to spend a while trying to figure out whether he can go for that white king immediately.
This is such a brave decision by Arjun to take on g5. I mean, if I was white, I would see knight takes g2 with the queen coming in with the check. And I wouldn't have the heart to go for it. And Alireza brings up the queen first, attacking, threatening a mate in 1 on the board. Arjun immediately blitzes out g3, so he has calculated this very important defense where, yes, black can pick up the knight on f3, but then white goes on to win the knight on f4.
Mm-hmm. It's lucky that white's queen is sitting there watching from afar to defend her king. The white queen would swoop in to defend just in time in this variation. So Firouzja can't go for this. He lands a check. The king moves. And now the question is, can he get to this white king or not? If he can't, then there's a bunch of problems. You've got too many pawns now. You've given up too many pawns to go for this attack. Also, this knight is under fire. So Firouzja, I'm surprised he went for that queen move so quickly. He just recaptures on g5. Can he keep the momentum flowing?
Huge threat. Knight h3 back to f4 is the threat. You need the pawn on g5 because without that pawn there, the queen on c1 would capture the knight. Now it is defended. The g3 pawn is pinned to the white king. That's a huge threat. So maybe at this point, white has to start backtracking. The knight on f3, it looks like it's on a good square, but maybe it has to drop back to h2, kick that queen out of there, keep it safe and sound. But I'm looking at this position, and I feel like with Arjun's time in particular, it's looking really scary, despite the fact that he is objectively better. I think you have to balance the position with the clock.
Yeah, there's all sorts of calculation to do here. Either the black queen can move, you could maybe even snag a pawn on e4 and calculate a whole bunch of checks. It's getting chaotic. Let's let the players try and figure out what's happening here. I don't think we'll see an error-free game from this point because it's so easy to go wrong. I think at some point, someone's going to make a mistake, and it's just about who makes the last mistake as it gets even more chaotic. First, I think Robert's right. Erigaisi needs to take defensive measures. He needs to move that white knight before it's too late.
Can Arjun allow himself more than a minute thinking pause now?
Some positions you can survive on a minute. It doesn't feel like this is one of them.
Oh, wow. And he brought the knight back, and look at how quickly Alireza scoops up the pawn with check against that white king. So if you decide to push your pawn up to f3, guys, I think we're going to see another sacrifice from Alireza. He's going to keep giving away pieces, exposing the white king.
Yeah, we have to show this because this would end in some cool little tactics, cool knight jumps. This would be the most natural move for white, blocking a check. It looks like you're forking two pieces here, attacking the bishop, attacking the queen, but bishop takes pawn would be pretty much obligatory here. And after a recapture, the black knight jumps back with a nasty check. And when the king moves, could we see a little dance between the knight and king? Maybe we'll see another knight check. The white king would have to jump out into the open if it wants to avoid a draw here. Repetition maybe the most logical finish. Instead, Erigaisi doesn't want just a draw. He doesn't want that to repeat. He gave up his rook for the bishop in the center, and now he's captured this black knight on the edge of the board. So it's now a completely different assortment of material. It's one pawn in white's favor, but his king is on the edge of the board. Precarious stuff.
Oh my goodness, white desperately wants to trade off the queens, because if we actually do a quick material count, white has 5 pawns, black only has 4. So if the queens just disappear, white has extra material. The presence of opposite colored bishops, that's important to store in your back pocket, in your memory bank, because that means with the queen trade, it's likely the resulting position will be a game where the point is split. A draw looks the likeliest outcome, but the queens are still on. The white king is out in the open on h3. That could be really dangerous, especially with the clock ticking down.
Yeah, on Erigaisi's side here, however, pieces are coming off the board, so it will be slightly easier to navigate with no time on the clock. He's attacking this knight, he's attacking this pawn, and I think for now there's not enough attackers around the white king to take advantage of its positioning. So there's almost no time to breathe in this game. I'm so impressed that Firouzja has found his way through these complications, still with 4.5 minutes on his clock, because there were so many options, so many twists and turns just in that last tactical sequence. But we've emerged with this position, and yeah, Erigaisi would love an endgame. He's not going to be given one, however. Firouzja is going to keep going for that white king.
What do you think will be the result right now in this game? Will we see a winner? Will it be a draw? What do you think?
This is so tough to answer because this position is literally playing for all results. Everything is possible, and it looks like, yes, draw might be a likely outcome, but the path to that draw is going to be super risky. Anything can happen. One of the ideas that comes to mind for Alireza is to give a check on f5. You were mentioning the pawn on g5 is attacked, the knight on d7 is attacked. A check on f5 would defend and guard both these undefended pieces, but Alireza doesn't care about defense. He wants to pick up that central pawn. He goes for it, but in return has to give up this very key pawn. I said draw is a likely result. Cut that out now.
I think that despite the material deficit, that Alireza is playing for a win. He's saying we have bishops of opposite colors. In the endgame, that may mean a draw, but when you're attacking, it means you can't actually parry off my bishop. It's on the dark squares, yours on the light squares. That knight on c5 trying to hop into the e4 square right next to the queen, just going towards the enemy king. This could be difficult for Arjun Erigaisi. Remember, there's only a 3-second increment, and he is down towards his final minute on the clock.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so easy to go wrong here. He brings his knight forward. That's a defensive maneuver as well as an attacking idea. He's just guarding that white f2 pawn and also hinting that he might jump forward with some nasty checks towards the black king. Suddenly, Firouzja has to find an equally multi-purpose move, perhaps. He needs to go for that white king, but he also needs to keep watchful eye over his king. Yeah, opposite color bishops. I've always found those the most difficult positions to evaluate, to handle, because it's never clear who's attacking, who's on the defensive. And I think both sides are playing for the win here. They would both want to push this one even further. And OK, first an attack against the white queen. The black knight sitting on a really nice square, I've got to say. And I'm just trying to look for safe squares for her majesty here. The white queen does find one on f5. But, OK, black's queen. If she could somehow land herself behind the white king, imagine the black queen on the bottom right-hand corner of the board on h1. There would be devastating threats there. So what is Firouzja Firouzja going to go for. He could also be greedy here and take time out to grab that white pawn on b2, but it doesn't feel too relevant right now. So I would be slightly surprised to see that one.
And it would allow that bishop, which has been sitting on b5 forever. Before it was pinning a knight. Now it's doing nothing except for staring in thin air. If that bishop can slide back onto a new diagonal, staring towards the black king, or if that bishop gets to c4, you're hitting the knight and the f7 pawn behind it. That could be really problematic for Alireza Firouzja. So he should not look at the clock and think, I'm going to go flag Arjun Erigaisi. This is one of the best bullet chess players in the world. I mentioned earlier, he won the Junior Speed Chess Championship by taking out Nihal Sarin. Everybody should know Nihal Sarin for being the runner-up in the Global Championship. So you don't want to just look at the clock. He needs to play the board here. And he has brought his queen to d1, looking at David's plan of going over to the h1 square. But it seems like it was a mistake.
Look at the bar.
Well, yeah, what is happening here? Maybe White could just ignore this. I thought it was a killer threat, but White's knight is just about able to jump back and defend. So right now, maybe there's a killer move. And wow, look at what Erigaisi's done. I wasn't 100% sure about suggesting this one, but Erigaisi was very confident here. He lands his bishop on this diagonal that Robert was mentioning, and what Firouzja might have missed is that any check from behind looks like checkmate, but White's knight can just jump back and defend. Suddenly the black queen is offside. She's in no man's land. She doesn't want to be on this side of the board. She's needed as a defender, and huge threats against the black king instead. Wow. Maybe... Sorry, go on, Tanya.
No, go finish your.
I was going to say, maybe it was just a bit of a bluff by Firouzja, and now he's regretting it.
Yeah, we saw that little head shake by Firouzja there. I think he completely missed the fact that Queen H1 is not a checkmate. And after the knight comes back to H2, you realize that knights are not only great attackers, but also really good defenders. You see how it controls all the squares around the king. There are no checks on the board. Bishop E6 is a massive threat. Yes, you can fall back with your queen to C6 now to try and defend that knight on E6, but now black has run out of fire completely. No threats against White's king. White simply makes a move like b3, guards that bishop on c4, and White's dominating. Yeah,
White's dominating. The knight can come back to a more active square later. Black is completely frozen. Once you have to go on the defensive, that will only spell bad news. And you are pawned down to boot. So not a great turn in this game for Firouzja. He's looking really downcast. You see him on the camera, head in hands now. His last move was a bit of a complacent one, perhaps.
For sure, because if you're going to be a pawn down in some positions, you want the opposite colored bishops. An added bonus of having this bishop on c4 is that at some moment, the right moment, we'll see Arjun take that knight on e6 and enter a position with knight versus bishop. That extra pawn will tell the story. So Alireza, he's on the defensive. He gets on his back foot. He brings his queen all the way back to c6. b3, David, your suggestion is great. Simple, strong, defending everything.
Yeah, you could make an argument maybe for taking that black knight right now, but I don't think there's any rush. There we go, b3 on the board, the most natural move. That black knight is not going anywhere. It's an easy target for White's bishop. White's bishop is now far, far superior to its counterpart. We were talking about the opposite colour bishops, the colour complexes. There's so many targets for that white bishop. There's no targets for the black bishop. It's hitting thin air, and yeah, it's turning in White's favour.
And White is still an extra pawn up. You've got that material advantage. You're out of danger with your own king. The knight jumping back into the attack. You might dissolve the problem of the opposite color bishops. These endings are always known to be a bit drawish, but that might not be the case once the bishop and the knights are traded off. This looks like Arjun could be headed towards a second victory, but of course, Alireza is going to make that super hard, and he moves the knight away.
But look at the clocks. Both players are on the 30-second mark, and that is dangerous territory. Look at this play by Arjun, centralizing the bishop. No more queen h1s for you. He's going to be able to bring his knight back into the game next. And if that knight hops forward into the enemy territory, there could be checkmate threats.
Yeah, we'll see that white knight get back into the action, leap back there. And also this pattern between the white bishop and the black knight. Last year, Simon Williams, the Ginger GM, he called it the knight stable. The knight is locked at home, can never move without being captured by that white bishop. It's total domination. And wow, Erigaisi just takes a timeout to keep his king safe. That white king now super safe in its palace there, surrounded by pawns. Black's king has fewer defenders around it. This one is certainly heading towards a white win right now. He just needs to get his knight maybe to a more active square. But Firouzja clinging on for dear life. And yeah, how are you guys at bullet chess? This is under 20 seconds for both players. It's getting nerve-wracking now.
But look at Arjun. He doesn't look nervous at all. And this is what I've always admired about him, that in the face of extreme time pressure, just the best in him comes out. He's still, we can see with the Valbar, making the best moves, keeping his pieces centralized, keeps everything protected. This is some great advice, by the way, that whenever you're low on the clock, just make sure that everything's protected. The bishop on c4 is guarded by the b3 pawn, the queen's guarded by the king, the knight's defended, everything under control.
Whoa, everything under control. But suddenly the position has changed. There were 2 or 3 very, very quick moves there. And suddenly Firouzja has grabbed a pawn. That white pawn on f2 was captured by the black bishop. The white queen is overloaded, having to defend her own bishop in the center. Couldn't take that black bishop. Now a pawn has dropped near the black king. It's total chaos, despite the reduced material, and black's king is on the run.
But that knight on d8, do not take it with the knight on f7. That knight's a very bad piece. I thought he was going to bring his knight back to e5 with check and say that knight is dominated on the back row. Instead, he brings a queen in with check. I feel like the black king is slithering away, and that gives Alireza increased chances to survive.
Yeah, and it feels like Erigaisi, the nerves are kicking in. He's giving a few checks to gain time on the increment.
Knight on d8 now.
Yeah, he's attacked the diagonal. This check can be blocked by black's bishop. The black bishop slid back to block. And still a dance between the white queen and the black king. Firouzja leaning back, though, and...
It's over. He won a piece.
He won a piece. The black king now cannot take that white knight because then you lose your bishop. And Erigaisi, we almost missed it there, but spun it in his favor.
And there's no check on the white king. The black king overloaded, and this is just game over. What a finish, and there we have a result. We've got 2-0 by Arjun. He takes a massive lead.
Wow, Arjun Erigaisi, what a player. He goes up by 2 points.